Hi and welcome. Brad Black, known as Brad the Bike Boy, is one of Australia's foremost Ducati tuners. Brad has written extensively about tuning Ducatis and other marques and has published many articles on his website. I was lucky enough to catch up with Brad at his workshop last Saturday for a chat about Ducati performance tuning. I hope you enjoy it. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you, Mike. Glad to be here.
Performance modifications on Ducatis. Where do you start?
Well, it sort of depends on the bike to some extent, and as the models have progressed, the things you do have changed because the Ducati engine design philosophy has changed. When I started, it was super sports, monsters, and the early 4 valves, and typically those engines have valves that are too small and cams that are too long.
By long, what do you mean?
Just the duration. Most of the cams had timing. The inlet closing, which is the most important point, was usually 70 to 75 degrees. And even like the 851 SPs with the really huge cams, they still closed about the same time as the Stratas, but they opened the valves 40 degrees before. So you end up with a huge amount of overlap, which made them idle badly, that sort of thing. But they actually closed the valves, all of them, much the same point. On a Super Sport, it was probably about 75 degrees on some of the I think on the Carby DSSs and monsters. So with the Ducatis when we started, I went to a training course at Fraser's late '98, and there was a guy, Mark Downey from North Coast V Twins was there, and Mark was doing a lot of cam timing playing with 2 valves in particular, and so Mark and I had a lot to talk about, and so when I got back we started playing with cam timing more in earnest.
So what did you actually do in regards to cam timing?
Traditionally the problem was, and we had sort of noticed this at the training course, we did the cam timing on a new 996 when the 996 was first released. And I think one of the inlet cams in the 996 was 10 degrees retarded out of the box.
As in not to factory spec?
Yeah, 10 degrees off. And that was fairly common. I think it was the vertical exhaust. So the vertical inlet was the worst. And the horizontal inlet might be sort of 5 degrees retarded. The vertical inlet would be 8 to 10 sort of thing. And so we started off initially going to the factory specs. And then with what I'd been talking to Mark about and the cam timing he was using, I sort of realised people were just advancing. And I remember hearing, I think probably Lee Farrell from Cafe Racer saying, we advanced the 907s, 3 or 4 or 5 degrees. And so if everything is ideal, then if you advance the cam, or if you advance the inlet cam in particular, it will give you better bottom end and less top end. If you retard the inlet cam, you'll get better top end and less bottom end. But the problem with the Ducatis was that primarily they were undervalved and overcammed. So you could advance the inlet cams. On the 2 valves, it's 1 cam, so the exhaust just has to follow along. But on the 4 valves, it's individual cams, so you can just move the inlet cams around. And so we just started advancing the inlet cams. And we do one, I think we did a 996 to standard spec, and next one we went to 100. The spec on a 996 is 119.5 degree inlet centerline, and then we went to 116, and then I went to 108. And back in those days, we would usually dyno the bike, play with it, dyno it again. We're always using the V2 adjustable pulleys back in those days, and at 108, it hadn't yet hurt the top end, and basically because the valves were too small. The cams were too long, so the valve timing wasn't what hurt the power. It was the valve size is what hurt the power. So you could move the cams a lot. And
how much did you end up moving them eventually?
Usually, in the end, we set all the 996s at 108 on the inlet, and we used to go 108 on the exhaust, which is 4 degrees retarded. Specs 112. So that's 108, 108. Which gives you a lobe separation of 108, whereas 119, 112 is 115.75 or something, a lobe separation. So they had more overlap, which the overlap also helps to some extent, helps the mid-range, helps pull the air through, or the exhaust going out sort of helps pull the inlet in. And that seemed to be about the best. We never went further than 108. I knew of some people who were going a lot further and having issues with them idling, apparently. But we went to 108. When we first got 916 SPSs, it was a 996cc engine, had 3mm bigger inlet valves, and how bigger were the exhausts? 1mm, I think, 2mm bigger than an exhaust. And the cam's much the same duration as a strata cam, whereas the previous SP cams had been 40 degrees longer. The G cams are really long. So the 916 SPS had a really nice inlet camshaft, and the exhaust cam, as it turns out, is fairly short duration, but it's very, if you look at a lobe or a lift diagram of a 996 SPS exhaust cam, it's really a lot of area under the curve. And so it had a really good exhaust cam and a really nice inlet cam. Lots of lift, which sort of helped them, and we started playing with a lot of them in the cam timing, and we would advance them to 107 degree inlet centerline from 119.5, which is 12.5 degrees over spec. And people would often say, like, that's a long way. And I'd say, well, I could never understand why Ducati spec'd them at 119.5. It was just lunacy, because you put it at 107 and it didn't hurt it anywhere. It had a heaps more mid-range, and they were just a rocket. It's the best engine they ever made in the Desmo Quattro. By far was that 996 SPS motor. So that sort of set the thing. I think the exhaust cam when that was 107, we just leave them where they were. Didn't move the exhaust cams as a general rule. And they'd pick up a whole lot of mid-range and the same peak. Often when you advance the inlets, often you pivot the power curve around the peak. So you sort of hang the power curve on its peak and do that with it. As you lift the bottom end up, the top end falls away faster. So often we'd end up with a bike like a 996 standard would make peak power at about 8.2, and then it would hold that power out to 10.5 or so, not really do anything. Whereas once we'd done the cam timing, it'd make more power at 8.2, but it would start falling away. And some people didn't, it sort of depends how you like the bike. Some people didn't like that because they couldn't rev it to 10.5 all the time. Some guys just love revving things. But on those engines with the collets, the little wire collets, if you can keep it under 10 grand, it does definitely save the collet from breaking. So it was sort of made it a good engine, as in it could keep the rev limit down a bit, and they went really well. They're a great road bike. And I've got dyno charts from, we even started with the 1098s of a 996 with the cam timing done, has more power than a 1098, which has a mid-range hole because of the exhaust design, up to like 8,000 revs or something.
Oh, that's quite impressive.
Oh, fantastic street motor.
So obviously Ducati were evolving the engine design. What was sort of like the next big change that you...
Testostrata came along, the valves got bigger. They redesigned the cams. I remember reading an article a little while ago that I think Kevin Cameron wrote it, and he was talking about Araldo Faraci saying that, I think it was Araldo Faraci was saying that in Italy they were testing the valve trains and they realised in Desmo Quattro, even though it's a Desmo, it's meant to be a fairly low friction design, that friction was the biggest issue. Once they sort of hit 11,000 revs, it was a real problem, and the cams were bending and all sorts of stuff as they really started revving them. And so the Testostrata cams are, like axle design, bigger and hollow, so a lot stronger. Even though they're hollow, they're larger base diameter, and everything's sort of bigger, but the rockers are shorter to some extent. And on those engines, on the base model engines, the camshaft duration came down a lot. The camshaft duration on a Desmo Quattro was about 260 odd degrees. On a 999 engine or a 749, it's 245 degrees, which is just, makes them...
Was that just due to the fact that the valves were bigger?
They just didn't need the duration anymore, and just makes less duration makes everything better. Yeah, I think the Ducati engine design philosophy went from, I guess, where they'd come from, because if you look at some of the early 4-valve cam profiles, it's similar to the 2-valve cam profiles they had at the time. So they're just taking the profiles or the cam sort of durations and going from there.
I guess they were learning really from what they'd done in the past.
And I think the first 4 valves, the first 4 valve was a 748, so it was a 88mm bore. And then by the time they got to, well, even just a few years later, that was 86. And in 90, think in 91 they were running the superbikes at 96 mil, but the valve spacing was still what it had been for the 88. And even a 996 still has the same valve spacing as the first 748 of 86. So that was the biggest issue. So the test-to-strata, the valves are moved apart a bit more. The valves are moved even more upright, so the valve angle's less. Chambers better design. So it's just it is an evolution, completely new head, but they had the option of doing that with the same bottom end, fairly easy. A test-to-strata, like a 998 base model, doesn't make any more horsepower than a 996 really, but it does so with 15 degrees less cam duration.
And obviously has more potential for performance.
Certainly, a change with the first test-to-strata we got was this 996R. It had the new performance cams, which are the same duration, sort of halfway between a Strata and an SPS Desmo Quattro cam, so I think about 263, 264 degrees. That's not a big cam. And those cams, compared to a otherwise identical base model or S model in a 998, it's sort of 13 horsepower difference. That's the only real difference, is the camshafts. And those 998S motors, or the 996R, is a really nice evolution. It was like you get on one, and whereas a 996 SPS would sort of start feeling a bit flat about $9,000, the test-to-strata motor just kept going. And particular, best way to describe the difference is in the monsters, the S4R monster with the 996 motor and the S4RS with the test-to-strata engine with the big camshafts and stuff. And people say, what's the difference? Say, well, the 996 motor will wheelie to $8,000 and then sort of you've got to change gear, whereas the test-to-strata just goes to 10 and it'll just hold third gear and just glorious. S4RS are just glorious things.
What sort of advice would you give someone who's got any of those, late 80s to early 2000s, 4-valve Ducatis who are looking to get a bit of extra performance? I mean, what's the best route to go?
Realistically,
I know it depends on the particular engine they've got.
Realistically, these days, the best answer is sell it and buy something else. That's the first answer. Like if someone's serious about horsepower, you say, if you haven't got an 1198S, then buy, if you want to go racing, whatever, buy 1198S. Start with that. It's by far the best basis for anything. But if you've got a bike and you want to keep it, the first thing I usually start off with is gearing, is the first thing. Some of them are very overgeared. The 916 was overgeared. The 996 has the same external gearing, but a different primary drive ratio. It's even more overgeared than a 916 was. So 996 is 1536 standard. I'd run 1543, so 7 more teeth in the rear. And that's nice gearing then. It's not stupidly short acceleration gearing, it's nice gearing. ST4S has 1538, and again, 1543 is really nice. Any of these, like the Paul Smart, 1543 is what I would run. So that's the first sort of step, and it makes it a nicer bike everywhere. The old Carbide Supersport, the 900, is 1537, 1539 gearing, 1437, 1540 was sort of one of the first steps. From then, I like doing the cam timing on them because it's a really nice way to get them to go better. A bit more money, depends what the owner wants, but the cam timing, and then on the fuel injected ones, we would tune them as well, fit a different EEPROM.
Change the mapping.
Yeah, because they do, all you're doing when you change the cam timing is trapping more air. On a bike with an N-alpha fuel injection system, which is a RPM and throttle position, it's fixed, so it says that at full throttle at 6,000 revs, it gets this much fuel, and there's no airflow sensing. So if you change the air it's trapping by 15% more air, 15% more fuel. So they have to change the EEPROM. That's pretty simple. Lighten the flywheel, often found was a good thing. The 916s, or the 916 and 748 with the 1.6 MECU has a single rotation sensor on the timing shaft, so the flywheel is just a bolt-on weight. It's about 1.7 kilos. You can just take it off and leave it off.
Really?
Yep. ST2, it's the same thing. And all the later, that's what the single-phase alternator was the first one like that, and the three-phase ones are the same. It's just a bolt-on weight. Some of the ST series, like ST2 and ST3, it's about 2.8 kilos, just bolt-on weight.
And doesn't affect idle or anything?
a lot of flywheel will exaggerate bad low-speed tuning. If it's bad, it'll be worse. If it's set up nicely, you won't even really notice it. The later flywheels on the three-phase alternator will be machined down because the flywheel itself is the spline centre. So we would just machine those down. We would take about 1.2 kilos off, about 1 kilo off them.
That would make a difference in feel of the engine, wouldn't it?
Most people who we did it for, some people would come in and you'd say we should do this, and I'd say, oh, I don't know, because the whole internet folklore of a light flywheel will go unrideable. And we'd get back to them and they'd say, riding around, I didn't really notice it, but when I got into it, it was quite obvious. So certainly 1 kilo sounds like a lot, but the cranks weigh about 4.5 kilos, and the rods, you've got to allow for the big end of the rods and the pistons. The rods are about 400-500 grams. The pistons are about 400-500 grams. The alternator basket on a three-phase alternator is a big, and it weighs 1 kilo or so. So in terms of percentages, it's not a huge percentage. So I would take flywheel weight off them, and realistically, it's a big dollar item, but I would say if someone's serious about making their old bike fast to ride, wheels. You start with the wheels.
Get some lightweight wheels.
And it's $3,000 or $4,000, which most people just go, oh, I don't want to do that. And I would sort of say if you're a track day person, that's where it is. And once you can do a minute 50 at Phillip Island, maybe start thinking about the engine. But until you get comfortably doing that, or maybe these days might be minute 45, might be the benchmark with the good tyres and stuff, or even lower. A standard engine will get you a long way. A 600 Supersport race bike these days, they're doing a minute 30 something at Phillip Island. They've got 120 odd horsepower. Not big horsepower, light and well suspended. So if you're serious about the bike going fast, wheels and suspension. Fix the suspension. It's not great. People think it's Ducati, it's got to have great suspension. They don't. Even the Öhlins need to be fixed. So the 40mm Marzocchis are just rubbish. The 41mm showers and the 43mm showers and everything but a superbike are the same internally, and they're all flawed. These days you get guys like Peter at ProMech who makes them single function, so one leg becomes rebound, one leg compression damping, so that each leg is totally individual, and that does away with all the problems. And that's a good way to get around it. Or all the suspension guys had their own way of doing things. They all make really good forks out of them.
I think we'd probably better draw a line in the sand here before I ran out of tape, as they say.
Before you fall off the cliff.
And I don't think there's anything else you want to cover, is there, Brad? That's pretty much it.
I can talk all day if you like.
Yeah, I know you can. Anyway, I'd just like to thank you for your time. It's been most enlightening. I'll have to zip out and buy myself an old 748 and bring it round with a dump truck of money.
They're heavy and slow.